The beliefs that they put in you go deep. They really get in your head.
Richard Turner, thanks so much for coming on to talk beliefs from York in the north of England. A couple of years ago, I interviewed you about your time in a Pentecostal cult and how it also ran a charity supporting survivors of human trafficking. Well, a heck of a lot has happened to you and to me since first speaking on this channel. I've got an eye patch at the moment because I'm suffering from a little bit of double vision. A lot of people have taken notice of your story, and you've appeared on numerous documentaries, podcasts, and radio shows as well. So today, we're going to not only explore your growing public presence as an activist, but also hear what you've learned in the 2 years since appearing on this channel. So how are you doing, Richard? You seem to be on a new show every month. Is it? How is it going? Is it exhausting? How are you doing?
It's been a roller coaster. I didn't set out to be doing this stuff. It didn't even occur to me that it might happen, to be honest. I just set up a counselling practice and did an interview with you, and that just springboarded me into all sorts of stuff. So didn't intend on any of this.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Richard, what's been happening since our interviews, and what platforms have you appeared on?
So we did this interview, and then a few people noticed me, and I started getting, well, there was a long period of time for quite a number of months where I get email after email from journalists, but nothing ever came of it. But I ended up appearing on a documentary on the Discovery Channel about Hillsong Church.
Oh, yeah.
So we did that, but I was only in it for about 30 seconds, but it was a nice introduction to the world of television and media. Also, Nicky Campbell came to the college I work at, the college I teach at, and interviewed me for his podcast series, Different, and it was also played on BBC Radio 5 Live. I've just been working on a show for BBC World Service Radio, and that actually came out today, on the day that we're recording this.
That's right, yeah.
Called Me, My Autism and Cults, and that's about the relationship between autism and cult recruitment. So that's a bit bigger than the Radio 5 one, I think. And apparently it goes out to 78 million people. So, no pressure. And I'm currently, doing a bit of consultancy work for ITV for a drama, but I'm not allowed to say any more than that. And there is a number of other projects, television projects in the background at the moment. So I've done a little bit of a television appearance, and I've been on the radio a few times for the BBC. I've also been quoted in a number of articles and been in our newspaper and things like that. But as I say, this isn't what I set out to do. It's just where I found myself, really, and it just seems to, one media thing just seems to trigger another one. So it's exciting, but it's taken a while to get used to, because I was very anxious about it in the early days, but slowly I'm settling down.
And you get about one call a week, I think you've said. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I often. What happened was I set my counselling practice up, and it was just a counselling practice. Then what happened is the family started calling me, and they wanted to understand cults and the psychology. So I started training families of cult members. So they call me up and I teach them about all the psychology. And then the media started calling, and then my counselling practice it went from just being about counselling to having 3 departments, if you like. So media consultancy is one of the things that I do now, and it's part of my business model. And that just happened naturally. So I get quite a lot of calls from the media. Lots of it doesn't come to anything, and I've gotten used to that over time. But it is now part of the structure of my counselling practice now. So,
well, I'm glad Talk Police was able to send you on your way.
It was a good experience, being on this channel, and it started to build up my confidence as well in myself. So it was the start of a great journey, which is still going on.
Well, one of the shows that you've appeared on just this month was the BBC radio show Me, My Autism and Cults, which you appear on along with another previous Talk Beliefs guest, Alexandra Stein. Richard, as someone on the autistic spectrum, how does that affect your life? And do you think that autism is something that cult groups prey upon?
You know, as I've grown older and matured, I managed being autistic much better. But when I was younger, you know, I struggled to fit in, struggled with relationships, felt like people had a rule book for interacting with each other that I didn't seem to have. The world was a very confusing place, you know, when I was a kid, and seemed to fall out with people, seemed to get it wrong, say the wrong thing, and just seemed to be very, very fixated on hobbies and interests and things like that, and less interested in socializing and less able to cope with socializing. In a nutshell, that's how it's affected me growing up. It's kind of been a thing that, you know, through my life, I felt like something wasn't right. Like I didn't understand why I always struggled. I didn't understand why things kept going wrong, and it's kind of chipped away at my self-esteem over my life, and maybe, you know, feel like I was defective in some way. In terms of cults, I mean, you know, one of the big things for me is just the low self-esteem thing, and I think, you know, that is why love bombing was so effective to me. You know, people really drawing you in, people, that instant friendship thing, you know, and feeling like, you know, there's always something wrong with you, and people being dismissive of you and looking down at you and wondering why you're not in a place in your life that you should be in. And you find this cult group and they're saying, oh, you're amazing, it's great to have you here, and, you know, you're so special, and it's really quite powerful if you've grown up thinking there's something wrong with you and thinking like you don't fit in. And but yeah, I had this bit of a one-track mind when it comes to the Bible and faith and things like that, and that almost makes you a bit vulnerable to that extremist way of thinking, I think, because you already are, or I already was, quite extreme in the way I used to approach faith anyway. So that made me drawn into like a group where everything is the teaching, everything is about the group and the mission of the group. So I think in that respect, being autistic made me vulnerable in that area too. And the other thing I was thinking about while we were recording this show is I often don't notice in the moment what's actually going on or what someone's motives are, and I take people at face value a lot and don't realize that someone was manipulating me. And I often have to really go away and think about social interactions and what's happened in them and how I understand them. And that's even now with a master's in psychology. I'm still struggling with that now, but even back then when I didn't have the knowledge, I would just go along with things so much, and not even be able to spot manipulation, coercion. There was very little knowledge, or I wasn't equipped to see what was going on at all, you know. And with the love bombing, it was a bad combination, really. You've got the powerful love bombing, and then you've got the struggling to see people's motives and struggling with what I feel like is a bit of a social disability, you know, a disadvantage. And that was just a bad combination for me, really. It's quite, for me, being autistic, it's like there's two layers of it. So one of it is the actual traits, and the other bit is like the trauma caused from the way you're treated because of the traits. So it feels like there's two layers to it. So the insecurities and the rejection, that's a bit to do with the trauma because of the rejection caused by the traits, if that makes sense. But with this uncertainty, I find that very hard to cope with, and often will avoid social interactions. There's lots of avoidance in me. Like if I have to talk to someone I don't know, if I have to deal with something that becomes with a strain, a social strain, I often will avoid it because there's an anxiety.
And a lot of people who end up in cults, they are there because they're uncertain about things anyway, and then they're given this certainty almost immediately.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because there's a strange little paradox, almost like there's rigid control and rules and things that are quite comforting to someone who's autistic, but at the same time, there's the trauma of coming from the instability and that they can just take everything from you. It's not trustworthy. Sometimes the rules will change, and there's punishment and there's rejection, and so it's almost like it's comforting and traumatic at the same time. And I think as well, there's a little bit where in the early days it's comforting until you find out what's really going on. So for me, I remember being quite flattered and comforted by them taking such an interest, and the control, it felt a little bit comforting. But as time went on, I was like, no, this is horrible. So there was a strange thing. It's both. It's sometimes both at the same time. It's good. It feels good, and it's bad at the same time. Even my day-to-day life, in social interactions, I'm intellectually managing them as I talk to people. Now, small talk is particularly difficult. I have scripts in my head of what to say when I'm talking to people because I don't naturally respond. So if it's on a topic I'm interested in, so like the psychology is what you might say is like a special interest for me now. So it's quite easy for me to talk because it's not a social discussion. It feels like it's a different part of my brain, but when it becomes like a social interaction, it feels like something in my brain changes and there's no information to draw upon. It's like a black hole.
Yeah.
And so when I'm in work and when I'm out and about now, I've learned scripts, so it doesn't seem like I'm struggling as much as I actually am. It's taking up a lot of energy to interact with people, and I struggle with eye contact as well because I can't read what's going on in somebody's face and concentrate on what I'm saying at the same time. So I've missed out on jobs because in the job interview I couldn't even look the interviewer in the eye. But I've gotten used to handling that so much so that sometimes you can't tell that I'm autistic because my brain is working very, very hard to manage social situations. So, even when I go in a shop, it's very tiring managing all of the sensory issues. So light, sound, light and sound are the main ones for me, actually, to be honest with you. I have issues with touch, but so for example, I've got here the flat I'm in at the moment is dimmed. The light behind me, that side, is like the only light on in the room, but I have these glasses I have to wear which is tinted because my eyes are so sensitive to the light that it actually blurs my vision. So I can't filter out noises as well, so I can't concentrate when I'm working. And this is all using up energy in me all the time. So I'm exhausted after I come home from work. It's bombarded. It's very confusing. Lots of lights and sounds. It gets very confusing. And if you think about this from a cult point of view, I was in a happy, clappy, charismatic Pentecostal cult. Now you're singing for 40 minutes. The music's loud. There's lights. I think that's, especially for me, probably, you're in that state of confusion. That's when they ask you for your money and tell you God's going to bless you and you're going to have breakthrough. And I haven't got anything to compare it to, so I only know myself. But I suspect even then, the sensory issues of being in those kind of church services was particularly difficult. And one of the things I've struggled with a lot is struggling to socialize but being lonely. So wanting to be around people, when I'm around them, it's absolutely exhausting and confusing and difficult. And it's almost cruel, like nature's cruel joke. You need connection, but you don't know how to manage it. Very, very, very difficult. So, and then you get in this cult and all of a sudden you've got instant friends and everything's dead rigid and controlled, and you're like, oh, actually, this feels a little bit comforting, in the early days. That's how it kind of, but in my day-to-day life now, I have reasonable adjustments in work to help me cope with my job. I struggle with just day-to-day living a lot, like tidying up. Managing my life is quite difficult because I can only cope with so much. And this now, I'm 40 now, and 2 years ago, that's the first time I've moved out to live on my own, because it was so developmentally behind everybody else. In my 20s, I was like a 15-year-old boy. And it's one of the strange things is now doing what I'm doing, I get the sense people are looking at me and they can't picture where I've come from, because of all the work I've done, because of all the studying, because of all the therapy, because of all the research. And I've worked so hard to be able to be like a mature adult, that sometimes now I feel it's a little, can even feel a bit frustrating, because I feel like saying to people, you don't know where I've come from. Like that, I was so far behind in my 20s. I was still like a child. There was to get to this point has taken so much work. And so this, I moved out from my parents at 37. And this job I'm currently doing, this is the first time I've ever had a full-time job. I've never worked more than an absolute maximum of 30 hours a week. So 4 days a week. But that was when I was about 35. But before that, I'd worked 16 hours a week all the way through my 20s.
Wow.
So it's like I felt like I was born without a rule book, and everyone else had it, and I was like, how on earth are people there and I'm here? And it was like I had a missing piece of the jigsaw. So you're around these group of people, and then they're making you feel really welcome, and you felt weird all your life, but you don't. It's almost like my gut was saying something was wrong about the group, but there was no social resources to help me picture what was going on. It's almost like it was a bit of a blank, a little bit. It just felt good, and there was gut feelings. Something in my gut was saying something was wrong, but the interesting thing is when I left, because I have a really rigid sense of justice and right and wrong, and I can't let go of things. So even though it made me vulnerable, the reason why I've excelled is because I was obsessed. And I went straight through teacher training, straight through a master's, straight into this, and I've never stopped, because it's been my fixated interest, my special interest, my really focused interest. It's actually been, in the long run, it's benefited, some of that. It's almost like that fixatedness, that knowing things actually gives comfort, because the world feels so out of control. If I learn all the psychology, it feels like it's under control again. It feels comforting again. So I just kept learning and learning and learning and learning, and that's how I ended up here. It's a bit of a strange journey, because who I am now is just so far away from where I was 10 years ago.
Well, you've done remarkably well for yourself, Richard, I must say, to get where you are now, and your job and all the appearances on TV and your own place as well. So you've done extremely well. It's been crazy. Yeah. And I think as well, what's very difficult is people expect so much of you when they don't know you're autistic, and they're like, why haven't you got a full-time job when you're 28? Why aren't you moving out? Why can't you drive? But you just can't. There's nothing in you to be able to do it. And there's so much shame that comes with that, and just that feeling of not being able to keep up with everybody else.
So yeah, but also when I got diagnosed, then you then accept it then, and it helps you heal some of that, because you're like, oh no, it's not my fault. You know, I mean, part of the reason why I can't drive is because I can't process the movement and the speed. My brain gets really confused. So it's even when I'm at the cinema and things are moving really fast, I can't look at it. I can't even look at the screen because I just can't handle it. But yeah, I have all sorts of quirks and things behind the scenes that people don't see. Like I can't change different styles of clothes. So the clothes I wear at home are the same clothes I wear at work. So I'll go to work in jeans and a hoodie, and I can't change back to between the styles of clothes. I have to cut all the labels out of my clothes because my skin is so sensitive to touch in certain areas. It's like a cactus down my top. And it's a sensory processing thing that comes with autism as well. So there's all sorts of things I struggle with. My girlfriend's having an interesting time getting to know me, because she's like, what on earth? Because I won't, like, when with travel arrangements, and then like everything has to be just so we can cope with the travel arrangem's. And
yeah, she might need the rule book.
She thinks I'm like Sheldon Cooper, to be honest with you. Yeah, she thinks so there's lots of similarities with Sheldon Cooper, but from Big Bang Theory, just in case anyone hasn't seen that. But yeah, but it you know, it's helped me learn, but it's also made me vulnerable as well, and it helped me escape as well, because I wouldn't let go when things were going wrong. I just wouldn't let go. They were trying to like gaslight me, and I was like, no, something's wrong here. So I just wouldn't let go of it, and I still haven't now. You know, so yeah, chasing the justice all the time. So I was actually diagnosed and I think it was 2018, which is after I left my cult group. But I went for the diagnosis because of all these experiences, and it got me reflecting on the past. And then I watched a documentary with Chris Packham, Asperger's and Me. And I thought, oh, this is me. But my cult didn't know I was autistic. People sometimes think I was diagnosed earlier, but I've lived through all of this not knowing what this missing piece was. And I do wonder sometimes, would they have treated me the same if they knew I was when I was in it? Or would they have gotten more backlash when I left if I didn't get the diagnosis? And I have wondered, does the autism protect me in some way? Or, you know, does it also mean as well, are they able to just dismiss my story because I'm autistic and say, well, that's just because he's autistic? So it's been an interesting thing to reflect on.
Richard, you spent several years in the C3 Evangelical Church, which you left after experiencing what you've called cult-like controlling behavior. So let's just remind our audience of your C3 experience, and also how they may have reacted to you speaking out about them on high-profile documentaries.
Yeah, so I am, I don't know if the word lucky is right, but I was quite lucky in that I was only really linked with them for about 3 or 4 years, and only attending their meetings in any kind of intense way for about a year or year and a half. So I worked for the charity, then attended the church, then I started dating someone in the church, and basically the deeper I got in, the more controlling it got, and the more I found out what kind of group it was. So in the end, you know, I was told I had to completely submit to the leaders. The leaders control who you can have a relationship with. Obviously, it was prosperity teaching, so they were coercing me to give lots of money away. And in the end, over the last 6 months, I was living with them, attending 2 meetings a week for them, working for them, and it was very passive aggressive. So some groups are, you know, there's lots of full-on direct bullying and psychological abuse, but mine was very manipulative, subtle, passive aggressive, silent treatment. You know, teachings from the front where your name wasn't mentioned, but you felt like it was about you. You know, constructive dismissal, tweaking your job role, you know, lots of very passive aggressive behaviors that were really humiliating, to be honest, and made you feel like the worst person alive. Lots and lots of gaslighting, treating you as if you were going mad, and things like that. So eventually I left because I pretty much had a breakdown. I was catastrophically depressed, ashamed. I thought I was a horrible person. I never told anyone that what had happened for about a year. And it was only when I just began to tell a few people a few things, they started saying, "You've been in a cult, that's what's wrong." So, you know, there hasn't been too much backlash. But the senior pastors left, and then they rebranded, and then they actually published a report themselves, which was strange because cults, that's not common. And they recorded that people reported being bullied, and there was manipulation and coercion. And in their own report, there was acknowledgements of some of this kind of behaviour. And you know, in the interview we recently did, you know, they give a politician's apology for it, and yeah, but there's not been a particularly huge amount of backlash. But I mean, part of that is because it was a passive aggressive group. You know, there's almost a sense of we're above all this, and you know, he's just some disgruntled ex-member, and you know, they in the early days I left lots of bad reviews on different places, and they just flooded it with positive ones, and you know, they delete your reviews, delete your comments, and you know, in a way, because they've rebranded and the leaders have left now, their argument is we're a different group now, and in some respects they're kind of right, but you know, generally, you know, the big C3 network, there is lots of controversy around that anyway, because obviously C3 is a huge network of churches, and there is some controversy still around that, but there has been a leadership restructuring since I left, and a rebranding. So,
well, on the BBC radio show, which premiered just today, you mentioned that as part of the evangelical world that you were in, there is something called a deliverance service, otherwise known as an exorcism. So when you were part of that world, Richard, you were assured by the leaders that most problems in a person's life stem from being possessed by demons. So how did this mindset affect your day-to-day life back then?
Yeah, so this is actually after the cult. So I went to a different church, and they prayed for me for deliverance and commanded spirits out of me, and I started hanging around with them afterwards. And this almost, well, it was the icing on the cake, really. So after the cult stuff, I then thought, oh, this is all my fault. This is because of all the sin in my life. That's why I ended up in a cult. I deserve this, because, you know, because of all the evil in me and because of all the things I've done wrong. So, you know, I then ended up in a equally toxic situation where, you know, I thought I had demons in me. I was a bad person. I brought all this on myself. I was taught that, you know, certain objects and books and DVDs bring evil into your home. So anything like fantasy or Harry Potter or anything vaguely magical brings evil into your home and can cause you spiritual harm. And in a desperation to find answers to a lot of this stuff that happened to me, I purged my life of anything associated with anything vaguely mystical, and this was also horrendously damaging. I was so like full of shame, and I thought, oh, if I get rid of all this, I'll feel clean, I'll feel happy. So, you know, all the things I needed to recover from being in a cult, my hobbies and interests and books and computer games and all the things I needed desperately that were part of my identity, I purged. So I got rid of everything that made me happy, effectively. And I ended up with hardly any possessions left. I got rid of all my Harry Potter DVDs, books, computer games, and it just made things worse. And I became really fixated then again on this idea that, you know, this spiritual warfare, obsessed with spirits and demons. And and it tarnished my worldview so much that I just thought everything was evil. We're coming to the end times. There's no point in having a career. There was no point in anything, and I just deteriorated and deteriorated. And it was horrific, really. It was the icing on the cake, really. And the problem is, I mean, there's many problems with it, but with that ideology, with that theology, you're never good enough. You're chasing after this thing. There's no way to measure anything. So every time something goes wrong, you start thinking, is there a demon in me? Is there sin I need to repent of? And it's just like a rabbit hole. Is it rabbit hole? That's the term, isn't it? You just go down and get lost in it all. And it took me a long while to realize that actually wasn't helping me at all. About a year or two. So I come out the other side of it, traumatized, having no possessions, not having my whole identity shaken to its core. And I think the key thing with a lot of this stuff, it's an attack on the identity, and all the things that I loved and enjoyed that make me unique, actually was taken from me. But I did it because I was trying to get better. But rather than I get better in a way where I'm talking about things and I'm in therapy, I was trying to get better through extreme spirituality. So.
And how can anyone tell if it is a demon? How do you measure that? How do you quantify it?
Well, yeah. How do you quantify it? How do you know if it is a demon or not a demon? And the problem is when you're actually confessing your sins or you're being prayed for, it does feel a bit hypnotic. It does feel a bit, you can come out feeling lighter, but the reason why you feel lighter is because you've been listened to, because you've spoken about what's worrying you. It's not because a demon has come out of you. It's because you actually just talked about how you were feeling. But then the whole thing, it just then keeps going back to that place of, you did this, you brought this on yourself. It's because of all the sin in you, and it's really destructive, unbelievably destructive. Yeah, I thought, I was like anointing my windows and doors with oil, trying to stop demons coming in. I was reading books about exorcism and demons and, Satanists and how they were trying to destroy the church and now they were all undercover in the churches trying to destroy it. And it was just crazy. But it was just because I was looking for some answers and I just didn't know what. And I kept going back to this extreme spiritual stuff because that's where it came from. What I was told was the answer to everything. And I actually got the most comfort from people who weren't trying to tell me about God. I got, the most comfort from education and going to see a therapist and talking about things and reading academic books and having genuine friendships that weren't trying to people weren't trying to control me. So actually the secular world provided a much safer place, it felt, after I left.
So looking back on all that's happened, especially what has happened since you have left religious groups and started speaking out, what have you learned?
I think what I've learned from all of this is how important it is to teach children as they grow up to critically think and to analyze, to teach them, as they go through the teens, what coercion is, the psychology of coercive control, not in any kind of frightening way, but that this is an ongoing discussion, so that they're equipped to spot things and to spot when someone's trying to recruit them into an unhealthy group. Or, education is massive in this, and it really is massive, because so many calls I get are from people who said, I never thought this could happen to me. I didn't know this even went on in this country. I didn't even spot it happening. I didn't notice it was happening. They just were, lots of people just weren't equipped to spot it, and they're not, the people who ring me, they're not vulnerable people. They're very bright, intelligent, educated people. It's like there's a gap in everybody's knowledge to be able to spot this stuff. And that's one thing I've learned a big time. The other thing I've learned is, when people are speaking out about these stories and things like that, there's often this horrible, attitude that people are speaking out because they're getting money for it or because they want the glory, but it's actually really stressful speaking out about this stuff, and you worry if you said something wrong and how you're going to come across in the media, and people interpret what you've said in the wrong way. It's actually quite a hard thing to do, to speak out, and it's very brave when people tell their story on documentaries and things like that. That's been interesting to see it from the other side. Also, there is like a black hole of support in this area, in that there are very few charities or very few specialist therapists. They just don't exist. It's like a unspoken issue. Especially in the UK, there's almost nothing here, and that's a big problem. Even though actually, when I do speak to people and they ring me up, because I get calls from student counsellors or other therapists. There's lots of people who are very interested in it. It's just that they didn't know they could do that. They didn't know they could specialise in helping ex-cult members, and the conversations aren't even happening at all, even as an option to do. So it's strange, really, in terms of autism and things like that. And there does seem to be a lot of ex-cult members who are autistic out there, and they're having to process the autism as part of the recovery from their own trauma as well. And there's even less people talking about that than there is about cult psychology. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think that's what I've learned.
Well, it's been great having you back on the show, Richard, and I just want to thank you for all the great work you're doing in speaking out, and hopefully we can have you back on the show one day in the very near future.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'm always happy to come back. I mean, this channel is it's been an important experience coming on these videos, because that has opened new doors for me, and I know that a lot of my counselling clients watch these videos as well. From all the stories that people are telling, they're often a lot of comfort for people. So always happy to come back on this channel. So it's kind of special to me because it was one of the first things I did. So yeah, always happy to come back.